Back to Normal by Richard Stockham, originally published in Fantastic Universe, November 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussell. 1. The Visemo Broadcasting Centre had been set for the night. John Mallory stood quietly beside his desk, looking up into the darkness of the high arching dome, which towered for 1,000 feet above him. He was a small man, with a body that stood straight as a ramrod, and eyes that were as bright as those of a cat staring into a beam of light. His rather gentle face was seamed with sorrow. He saw the shiny steel runway spiraling up and up against the dome's blue-black roof. He saw the 2,000 white, red and green button lights blinking on and off, and the 1,000 dial faces glowing softly. He checked the lights for correct patterns. Satisfied, he thought, "It's like the night sky, and no one alive but me has ever seen the night sky. But someone must. But when? In my lifetime?" It was at this moment he saw the massive steel door directly in front of him rising silently like a portcullis. Instantly he faced it. 3 men were entering the dome. Mallory recognized them instantly: the mayor, the chief psychologist, and the head technician. Something's wrong, he thought. They'd never just walk in on me like this. How much have they found out? He stood very still as they marched toward him, like generals on a deserted reviewing field, trying to pretend that a column of crack troops was still lined up awaiting their approval or displeasure. The 3 men stopped 10 feet away. "We've come to ask you some questions," said the mayor. Mallory noted the grimness in the man's heavy face and grey eyes, and he was further disturbed by the stiffness of the tall, erect figure. "All right, Mr. Mayor," he said slowly. The mayor seated himself at the desk. The psychologist came up and stood beside him. He was heavy-set and short, wore a goatee, and had dark, piercing eyes. The technician, a bald-headed wisp of a man, was already moving up the spiral runway. Abruptly, the mayor said, "Mallory, your family came to see us today." With a stubborn effort of will, Mallory controlled his surprise. "You mean," he said, "they left the house and actually came to your office and talked to you?" The mayor nodded and turned for confirmation to the psychologist. "They were on the verge of hysteria," said the mental specialist. "The Visemo programs have failed to soothe them." "My God!" exclaimed Mallory. "We went to your house," said the mayor. "We checked your Visemo receiver. It happens to be in perfect working order." So they didn't find it, thought Mallory. They didn't find it. "The people's only source of stimulation," said the psychologist, "is the Visemo, as we all know. And in this particular city it comes from here, or it should. I would say, Mr. Mallory, there's a possibility that your family is absorbing emotional and intellectual stimulation from somewhere else." Mallory sat down, assuming an appropriate attitude of dejection. "The impending, almost certain tragedy," went on the psychologist, "of this one outbreak of hysteria cannot be exaggerated. One family has begun to break down, and yet They're supposed to be under perfectly conditioned control. The ghastly aberration could spread to other families and to other cities. That would be catastrophic. Our whole system of control would break down. You remember, of course, how the madness broke out before Visemo, and what a terrible thing it was. It mustn't happen again. We're the first generation underground. Our discipline must be complete. His features hardened. You understand that, of course. You can't forget it. Memory of our life on the surface is a terrible burden to bear. But we've got to bear it. We've just got to keep remembering how much easier it will be for our children and the generations to come. Our lifespan is 125 years. Sometimes I wish it wasn't, but that's the way it is. And Visemo is our one and only barrier against madness. It's got to be protected. He paused. Mr. Mallory, your wife and, to a lesser extent, your 2 children were in terrible conflict this morning. They couldn't reconcile themselves to the 2 types of programs that have been coming to them over Visemo. Now you spend your entire evenings watching, feeling, thinking Visemo. Have you been in conflict over the programs at any time? No, said Mallory. Not at all. That's strange. The psychologist paused. It could be, of course, that the programs were in perfect order while you were home. Did my wife describe any of them to you? She tried to, but it didn't make much sense. What is it you want me to do? Asked Mallory. Just go home tonight. Be with your family. Watch the Visemo. Feel the emotion and intellect beams. From this end, Mr. Evans, our technician, will check the Visemo Center thoroughly. I could check it, said Mallory. Better and faster. He thought of the hidden broadcasting set he had built into the massed wires and circuits and beams high in the center's top. After all, I helped build the center. Just a moment. The psychologist raised a finger. We need an objective opinion. All right, said Mallory. Then more quietly, suppose you find the center in order. Suppose my wife and son and daughter stay the way they are now. The mayor stood up. In that case, it will probably be necessary to devise some sort of shock treatment or operation that will destroy your memories of each other. Mallory felt a wave of despair sweep over him. Of course, said the psychologist, if such a thing is done, it will be quite painless. And since family ties are only a matter of convenience, there will be no grief. I understand, said Mallory. And now I'm to go home and watch Visemo as usual. That's right, said the mayor. With your family. You'll find them waiting for you in front of the Visemo screen. They were given a mild sedative that must have worn off by now. They'll be watching one of the standard programs. Tomorrow morning you can report here at the usual time. Fighting to control the trembling that was creeping through his body, Mallory moved across the great black-walled room. Silently, the massive steel door rolled upward, and he stepped out into the travel tunnel. The bullet-shaped tunnel cars were darting past on their magnetic currents 10 feet in front of him, and the entire tunnel was as bright as day, stretching off to right and left like a mile-long glass tube blazing with radiance. Now his dread was a stifling thing. In his mind he could see his family waiting in the circular living room with a Visemo eye staring deeply into them and the emotion and intellect beams focused upon them. He had an intolerable mental picture of the beams playing all through their brains and along their nerves, probing into glands and vital organs with desires that became needs. For 10 years he had feared this evening, and now the facing of it was like a leap into darkness. He stepped forward, breaking an electronic beam. One of the bullet-shaped cars stopped. Climbing into it, he pulled shut the hatch and pressed a button on the dashboard. Immediately he was immersed in the floating speed, with the white blur of the tube walls all around him. Leaning back, he closed his eyes, knowing that it would be 10 minutes before the car reached the suburbs, 500 miles out. A century before, where the tunnel now stretched, there had been only a labyrinth of subterranean caverns rushing with rivers that drained into the oceans, while the surface of the earth writhed in convulsions under the rain of the great missiles. And now the people who had burrowed into those deep, empty places, preferring life underground to death on the radiation-saturated surface among the black craters, were beginning to think and feel again. It was a long time before the representatives of the huddled groups scattered here and there over all the earth agreed that the past must be locked away in stone vaults, so that man could begin again with what was native to his own mind. So the books that lay about in the rubble, the works of art, everything disturbing and controversial, was locked away permanently. Philosophy, psychology, religion, and history. All this, in each of the great city scars, was sunk deep into the ground in massive stone vaults, sealed shut and forgotten. Only the survivors' knowledge of machinery and science was left upon the face of the earth for the people to build upon. Soon great cities, 500 miles in diameter, began to grow, one upon each continent: South America, North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. The cities of the stone cupolas they were called, each cupola 20 feet in diameter. Mounds of stone, they were doorless and windowless and lead-lined to hold back the radiation death. While the men toiled in their grey radiation suits, the women and children waited deep within the ground. The surface of the earth had been killed, the scientists affirmed, and it would never come to life again. Man must live forever separated from the sky and the land, and, after many generations, the surface of the earth would be only a place for him to explore, as he had once explored the depths of the oceans and the depths of space. This would bring almost unendurable pain and sadness to the first generation, which could remember, and to the next, which would share vicariously the longing from their parents as they listened to the stories of how life had been lived under the sky. But the memories would eventually die, and the stories would become myths, and man would adjust to his environment. After many years, the cities were finished. The cities with the tunnels for streets, below the cupolas, and the people living like ants, never knowing the night and day sky, never knowing the live growing things upon the earth, never feeling the push and buffet of wind, nor the driving wetness of rain, nor the warm press of sun. Only the stone cupola cups, with the people sitting and waiting now that the work was done. Waiting for what? With the silence and the sitting and the wondering. The answer was, of course, the machine. The machine tended gardens below the cities and parcelled out food. The automatic, self-repairing sewing machine turned out clothes, and the exercise machine kneaded and rolled, pushing and pulling. The doors of the cupolas opened at the approach of a shadow, and the bullet transportation cars flashed along the shining tunnels, whisking the people from place to place, where they talked and talked endlessly of the clothes and the food, and of the waiting and the wondering. Where were they going, and why? Where? The 22nd century miracle cities were stocked to repletion with comfort and security pressed down and running over. And then one day a man clawed at the walls of his cupola, and another sank into an endless lunatic trance. Others cried out against the stillness, pleading with the circling tunnels to straighten, and ran yelling and stumbling all through the intolerably safe labyrinth of the cities. There arose then a need for something new and different that would restore sanity to the restless and despairing. There were a few men and women who remembered the old days of television, to whom the fundamentals of these old machines were still a treasured legacy from the times of the exploding missiles and the self-exile of millions in the underground caverns. And so these few brought back the ancient television sets and the broadcasting centers as they had been before the great devastation of the hydrogen wars. And when the people watched television, they no longer pounded the walls of their cupolas or wandered, shocked and staring, along the tunnels of the cities. The new technicians added to the old television. They added emotion and thought beams, third dimension and stereo sound. They added the screen that curved around 3 walls of the room, and color and taste and touch. And with each addition, the people in the cities grew quieter. They sank back, listening and watching, enjoying to the full the splendors of sight and sound, of thinking and feeling, which the great curving screens brought to them. A contest was held all over the earth then to find an inspiring name for this new saviour of humanity. The name chosen was Visemo. And so the madness was subdued and held in check. 2. John Mallory opened his eyes. The tunnel light engulfed him, and the bullet-shaped tunnel car seemed to hang poised in the darkness. Yet he could sense its terrible speed. And he remembered. He could remember back to the night before the Visemo was conceived, before even the ancient television had been revived. He had been one of those who had felt themselves sinking into the madness, the insatiable craving to see space out beyond the winding tunnels of the city. Yet he had struggled within himself, desperately, to hold at bay the awful thing that had happened to him. And while he walked through the endless winding tunnels, his eyes on the grey walls pressing in upon him, He knew that he must find some way of escaping into whatever lay beyond, even if his daring led to his death. So John Mallory, electronics expert, machinist, physicist, mathematician, conceived and fashioned a cutting instrument that could open up the walls. He perfected it as the other men were frantically endeavoring to keep the people from even thinking about what lay beyond their safe stone and steel labyrinth. Then, late one night, while his wife and his 2 children lay asleep, he held the finished instrument in his hand. It was a disc, a simple circle of steel with a white button in its center. As he looked at his invention, he wondered how it had happened that he alone, of all the people in the city, had decided that he must go out on the surface of the earth, and had logically discovered a means of doing so. But he could not know, just as the first man who had used fire could not have known, why such a discovery had come to him, or the first man to conceive the bow and arrow, or trace out the crude outlines of a bison on the walls of a cave. A feeling, a drive, an inner need simply translated itself into action because that was the way it had happened. And who could know the why of it? And so John Mallory had put his philosophical problem aside. He stepped close to the wall and held the disc against it. He pressed the little white button. A beam from the disc thrust through the wall, instantly dissolving the molecules of lead and steel alloy and concrete. He moved the disc from the floor up in a half circle and down to the floor again. A piece of the wall fell outward. He crawled out on the quiet earth under the blue-black sky, with the spread of stars broad and deep above him, and the air cold and fresh in his nostrils. He stood for a long time, letting the cleanness and freshness and the wide expanse of wonder soak into his starved body and mind. At last, with 20 minutes left of the 45 minutes allotted to him before the saturation of the radiation death, he began to walk, checking the time, 10 minutes out and 10 back, and just as he was becoming deeply aware of the swinging, rhythmic motion of himself across the earth, he suddenly felt a jolt of hardness under his feet. Bending down, he found the great slab of concrete, the top of the vault that held the ideas that argued with each other. An immense storehouse it was, containing in its shadowed recesses works of philosophy, psychology, and religion, and all the vanished splendors of music and art. Using the tool that had opened the cupola wall, he made an opening in the stone roof and let himself down into the great cavern. He stood there, swaying in wonder and staring at all the creative accomplishments of man's mind and heart. Suddenly, when he touched his timepiece and realized that he had overstayed his time an hour beyond the safety margin of the radiation death, he sank down and prepared to die. But death did not come, and he knew then that the radiation no longer rose dangerously from the earth. And so, through the years, he returned at night into the vault and became lost in contemplation of the paintings, the music, and the sculpture. He let the ideas and the excitement from the books open up within him like a bright, many-petaled flower. He took many of the books home and hid them, and read them at night while his family slept. He read of how man had blasted into radioactive dust the cities that he had built with such daring and creativeness, read how he had killed the living surface of the earth and burrowed deep into the drained subterranean caverns and tunnels and waited for he knew not what, shivering in fear. He read, too, of how terrified humanity had buried its past as it might have buried a body that had been murdered in a blind fury, and had sunk it deep so that it could no longer haunt the dreams of the living. Suddenly now, Mallory was conscious of the lighted tunnel and the bullet travel car floating motionless. Opening the hatch, he stepped out onto the concrete platform and walked down a passageway, past the many doors that opened into the long line of cupolas. As he walked, he remembered how he had often seen his wife, Helen, and Mary and Bob, his children, absorbing, without any real understanding, the sights from the Visemo eye, and the thoughts from the beams that played so relentlessly upon their brains and nerves. He remembered the pain of fighting the hypnotism of the beams, while he watched with horror the minds of his wife and children floating away from him, like swimmers on a dark lake. When he realized that they would eventually lose their identities in the great eye of the Visemo receiver, he knew he must struggle to save them. So he searched within himself for a weapon, and, after many months, he knew that there was only the machine itself left for him to fight with. For many hours and weeks he went out at night upon the earth and walked. He thought of the tasks that still lay before him, like some awful deed. He thought of the weight of his duty, and searched within himself for the strength to endure it. Only a machine was left to use as a surgical instrument to cut away the scars of deadness and blindness from the minds of his wife and children. And if he were able to succeed, what then? Could there be any real hope or freedom for just the four of them out upon the earth, living the life of the earth, with the others left deep within the deadness of the tunnels and the cupolas? Just life for himself and his family, and everlasting despair for the others? He knew then that he must save them all. The others, too, had to be given a chance to live again, and only he could give them that chance. An idea had come to him, and there was a something in himself which demanded that he pass it on to them. And so the choice was made, and his secret work began. There were weeks and months of it, a labor that centered around the secret building of the tiny Visemo broadcaster and receiver, while he was alone during the day in the Visemo Broadcasting Center. The tiny broadcaster was woven into the very wires and currents of the Visemo Center, and the tiny receiver was molded at night in his house, while his family slept, into the intricate internal mechanism of the Visemo receiver. And finally the work was done. He was ready with the pictures of the food and the million things being dissipated, first for moments and then for minutes, in the great broadcaster. He was ready, too, with pictures of the old plays and the works of art and literature that he had found in the sunken concrete room, which would be run through the tiny broadcaster, picked up by the tiny receiver, and transferred into the Visemo eye and the thought and emotion beams, and from them into the minds and hearts of his wife and children. Mallory stopped before a door that was like all the others in the long line of doors. Silently it slid back, and the room opened up before him. He saw the dimness and the flickering coloured lights which were reflected on the walls from the half-circle of screen. He saw the emotion and thought beams playing gently on the three figures sitting there before him. He stopped just inside the door. It closed quickly behind him. His wife and the children did not look at him. Instantly, he felt a surge of desire to buy the black velvet dress, skin tight at its top and flowing full and swinging to the ankles. It was being modelled on the screen by a tall, willowy girl with silver hair and a rarely beautiful face. "Buy it," the smooth tones said. "Buy it. Rejoice in the soft flowing silkiness, the clinging satin caress, and the heady perfume instilled forever in the texture of the cloth. Buy it. Buy it for his wife." The desire engulfed him. And at that moment his wife saw him. Rising, she said, "Oh, John, I've got to have it." She was a thin, greying little woman in late middle age. Her movements were sparrow-like, her face and eyes intense, expectant. He did not move or speak. The girl jumped up. She was a child, trembling on the verge of adolescence. "Get it for her, Daddy," she pleaded. "Please." And the boy, a mid-adolescent, urged, "You've got to get it, Dad." Then both children sat down, watching the screen again. Mallory felt a dizziness. "My God," he thought, "they've tripled the power at the center." He sank into a chair. Now a picture of a broiled chicken and a jelly omelette with coffee and toast appeared on the screen. He could smell the crispness and the aroma. A man and woman sat at the table on which the meal reposed and began eating, ecstasy in their faces. Instantly Mallory experienced intense hunger, as though he had not tasted food for hours. Glancing at his wife, he saw her moisten her lips. He saw the boy rub his mouth and then gently press his stomach. He saw the girl swallow hard and squirm in her chair. His wife said, "Tonight. We'll have it tonight for dinner." She turned to Mallory. "John, press the button to the food center." "I'm starved," said the boy. "Me too," said the girl. Mallory shuddered, stepped to the wall, and turned a redly glowing knob on the Visemo's tuning dial. Instantly the room became silent and dark. "John!" exclaimed his wife. "What have you done?" He waited a moment. Then, as he heard Mary and Bob stirring, fright in their movements, he grasped a blue knob and gave it a full turn. Music flowed into the room, and the screen was filled with a picture of a black woman, her eyes closed, singing Ave Maria. The deep richness of her voice rose and fell, vibrant with the feeling of dusk and dawn, the passing of the seasons, and the growing life of all things. There was warmth and well-being in the glowing voice tone, and beneath the ebb and flow of the softly crying strings throbbed pain and grief and longing. Mallory watched the faces of the three. His wife stared in silence at the screen, her mouth tight. The boy watched with his eyes open wide. Mary was smiling faintly, losing herself, it seemed, in the flow of sound and in the dark, sad face of the singer. Just to see Mary's face, thought Mallory, justifies all the years of waiting. He sat down. The movement startled his wife. "I can't stand it," she said. Bob jumped to his feet. "What program is that, Dad?" Mary said, "It's beautiful. It's so beautiful." "Turn it off," said Helen. Mallory pressed the blue button. The voice died, and the screen became a dark half-circle of wall. "Now turn on the other picture." His wife's voice was trembling. "No, Helen, I won't," he said quietly. "Why?" she demanded. "Because I can't stand it any more," was his firm reply. She shook her head. There was a wildness in the motion. "I've got to know what's happening to us. If only we could be quiet and happy again. But we don't know what happiness means any more. Why can't we just get back to the way it was before the children were born? The pictures were so peaceful then. They were all about the food and the clothes and the refrigerators. They were all about the new furniture and how the styles had changed. Just peaceful news about how people had everything they needed. And then the pictures began to be different. Now and then, just for a minute, like the pictures we saw this morning. And slowly the changed pictures became more frequent. But they were coming from the center. That convinced us they must be all right, and we accepted them. Then, as time went on, I began to feel uneasy about them, and later a little bit excited. Then I became terribly excited, and then, for the first time, this morning, I couldn't stand the pictures changing back and forth. We were watching a food program for the lunch menu. It was demonstrating a new way to cook beef stew, different from anything we'd ever even imagined before. We got so hungry that I reached out to press the food button. Then the picture changed, the way it always does. A man was talking. He said something about the oceans and the crash of water on rocks. The picture was still, but he talked about the movement in it. Another picture showed a big dark rock, and at the bottom it was green. The voice talked about bushes and trees and the sky and a mountain. I just remember the words. And there was another one, all blue-black with dots of white, and strange-looking square structures, and at the bottom it was green too. The voice talked about bushes and trees and the sky and a mountain again. I just remember the words. "You've seen pictures like this before," Mallory said quietly. "Yes," his wife acknowledged, "but they made me feel different this time. It was as if two awful forces were pulling me in opposite directions, as if I were being torn apart. I had to do something. So I told Mary and Bob to get ready, and we'd go to the psychology center. It's what we've always been told to do if we ever felt sick." Mallory stood very still, restraining an impulse to go to her and comfort her. Never before in their lives had there been the need for comfort or sympathy between them. But only he could understand her need now, from the books he had read and from his own yearning for sympathy throughout the long years. She wouldn't understand, he told himself. She would feel only shock and fear. As he started to speak, he felt Mary's hand brushing his sleeve. Bob moved to the side of his mother and stood there quietly, as though he had lost something. But the children understand, he thought, instinctively. Visemo hasn't saturated them yet. He smiled wryly. "I know what they said to you at the psychology center. They told you that many of the broadcasts you were getting weren't sanctioned by the control board. They said somebody was feeding you mental and emotional poison. She nodded. It's true, he said, about some of the broadcasts not being sanctioned. They weren't. I'm responsible. Helen covered her face with her hands. But it's the sanctioned broadcasts that are the mental and emotional poison, he said. I don't know what to believe. I don't know. Look, Helen, he said, I've got to show you. Tonight. I've got to explain. They said I was supposed to spy on you. They said you might be... He looked at her. Insane? Yes. But you can't spy on me, he told her gently. I want to, she said, but at the same time I want to help you. I want to comfort you if you're sick. But some of the pictures on Visemo seem to be saying nobody can be sick, and others show people helping the sick. Some of the pictures show people being unhappy, and others make us forget all that and show people always happy. It's as if the pictures lie to each other, and I feel the same way, as if I'm lying to myself. You've never wanted to help anyone before, have you? He asked. For a long moment she thought. Then she shook her head. No, I never have. But now you want to help me. Yes, in a way, Wait. He held up his hands. Your yes is true. That's enough. I desperately need your help. Sometime this evening, it could be any time, the mayor and the psychologist will come into this room to see how the stepped-up power of their broadcast has affected us. What they see will decide whether we will be allowed to go on together or be separated forever and changed into other people. I want us to go on together. Mallory could feel his daughter moving closer to him. He watched with concern his wife sink into a chair in indecision, while his son knelt solicitously beside her. Before the mayor and the psychologist get here, I want to take you out on the surface of the earth, he said. But it's death on the surface, exclaimed Helen, alarm in her voice. He rose, walked to the far end of the room, and knelt down. He took the disc of metal out of his pocket. A long time ago, I made this torch, he said. It dissolves the wall in a thin line wherever I place a mark. It's very much the same as drawing a pencil line, and where the line is, there's space. I made a door here in this spot, leading to the outside. I've gone out on the surface of the earth for many years, and I'm still alive. When I came back, I set the section of wall in place again. Then I changed the instrument and sealed the wall shut. You mean, said Helen, awe in her voice, you've been going out here at night while we were asleep? I had to see the outside, he told her. Man has walled himself away from life and beauty. He's imprisoned his mind and feelings in the cruel iron walls of the Visemo. He nodded. I had to show you more than this living death. I had to bring you out under the sky. Mallory knelt down and ran the instrument around a 3-foot square area in the wall. The piece of stone, lead, and metal remained stationary for a long moment. Then it fell outward. Instantly Mary scurried toward the oval of darkness. No! Helen cried out in frantic warning. No! The girl stopped, looking defiantly back over her shoulder. All you'll find out there, said Mallory, is beauty and freedom and the sky and stars."
"But I'm afraid," said Helen. "I don't know."
Then Bob said, "Dad, I can smell the freshness." He bent down, staring out into the night. "I can see dots of light up toward the top."
"All my life,"
said Helen, her voice seeming to come from a great distance,
"I've been here inside the city. I was told never to leave, and I was happy here. We can turn on the Visemo and watch it and forget about out there. We'd be happy again."
Mallory shook his head and stepped back from her. "There's something I've got to say. I suppose if I had dared to say it before, I'd never be able to say it now. I'm going out there, and if I go alone, I won't be back." He turned to the boy, who was looking from him to his mother, a frantic longing growing in his face. The girl reached out and took Mallory's hand, holding it tightly. The woman was staring at the floor. Mallory felt the small hand tremble faintly, as though his daughter were anticipating a leap. Gently he tightened his grasp on her hand, bent down, and stepped out into the night. 3. As Mallory straightened up, he heard Mary's breath catch in her throat. Looking down at her, he saw the moonlight bright on her face. Incredibly, her face seemed to be floating in space just below his shoulder. Her eyes were wide, reflecting pinpoints of light, and her lips were barely parted, and her breathing was quiet. She said,
"Oh,"
and was silent again, her slight body moving across the swirled ocean of light points. Slowly Mallory turned his eyes to the oval of light in the cupola wall. It was empty. He saw a lighted oval of grass glistening with drops of dew. At the same time, he was aware that Mary was staring in silence and wonder at the tangled treetops black against the moon-washed sky. He had been sure, at least, that his son would follow. He could not go back to a house that could never be a home, and he could not continue on, not with just Mary. How could he abandon a woman and a boy whom he loved more than his own life in the cupola? Then suddenly he saw Bob, a shadow with a light at his back, kneeling in the opening. The next moment he was standing beside his father. After a long time he said, "It's like being in a big room. You can't see the walls, but you know they have to be there." And then he too was watching the depth of the night sky. "What was your mother doing?" Mallory asked, "when you came out?" "She was just standing, looking down at the floor," Bob said. "I'm going back in a few minutes." His voice trembled on the edge of crying. "Are you really going away for good, Dad? Will you take Mary with you?" Mallory held his eyes on the oval of light. "I don't know, son. I thought she'd come out with us. I was almost sure of it." "She won't," said the boy. "She's too scared. You can't blame her, Dad. I was so scared coming out I thought I'd faint. And now it's so wonderful. But I've got to go back." Mallory was silent. He could tell himself that his wife, back in the room, had made her choice, and that her decision had been inevitable. He could tell himself that she had chosen to stay in the narrow prison of the city, caught in the death trap of the Visemo. Surely it was better that a man and his children should be alive under the sky than imprisoned with the living dead in a tomb of walls sunk deep into the ground. But the struggle within him raged unabated. He looked deeply into the darkness among the silent trees under the silent sky. Why could he not summon the courage to seal the opening quickly, before that fierce inner struggle left him standing on this one spot forever? As he bent down to lift the displaced piece of wall into place, Helen's shadow fell abruptly across it. And then she was in the opening, the darkness and the moonlight on her pale face. Gently he said, "Helen," and reaching down, grasped the hand which she held up to him. As she stood beside him, he could feel her trembling. She raised her face to the sky, a wild surmise in her eyes. "I had to come," she said. "I couldn't go on living without you." "We wouldn't have left you," he lied. "After you'd all gone and I was standing there alone, I seemed to feel the walls pressing against me. The whole house felt dead. It was as if you'd all been swallowed. And then I knew I had to come out to you." Quietly, Mallory began to tell them about the surface world. He told them how the day and night came and went with miraculous regularity, and how the stars floated in a sea of space that stretched into distances that were lost in some infinite vastness without beginning or end. He spoke of the moon, which was so close, and of its reflected light, and of the sun that would be shining life on the earth all through the long day that waited beyond the darkness. And he described the great floating galaxies beyond their sight, the star clusters, the white dwarf suns and the giant yellow ones. They stood there for a long time in the coolness, listening to him as he talked about the even greater wonders he had discovered from the books in the sunken vault of stone, about the seasons of the earth and how the blades of grass grew by absorbing nourishment from the soil and the trees, and the crops which man had once cultivated upon the earth. They heard about the mammals and insects, the birds, the swarming life in the oceans. They listened in awe as he told them about the rolling, surging waters over the face of the earth, and the mountain ranges thrusting up into the sky, and the layer of air that was the earth's atmosphere. And as they listened, there came to them a more complete understanding of the death they had thought of as life within the press of the walls. But now the joy they were experiencing deepened their need for life ever more abundant, and they desired only to walk upon the earth and be a part of the birth and growth cycle that after all the years was rising and spreading there again. Mallory stopped talking. They listened to the buzzing and humming of insects, and to a breeze that had begun to flow among the trees. They listened to the rustle and the sighing, and from behind the hills there came to them, on the eddying currents of wind, the crash of the ocean surf breaking against beach and rocks. They smelled the fresh, clean smell of dew-washed leaves and grass, moist earth and night-blooming flowers. And then suddenly Mary said, "Let's never go back in the house again." Helen started and looked at her daughter, a growing wonder in her eyes. "What are we going to do, John?" she asked. "We could go out on the earth," said Mallory. With awe in his voice, Bob said, "There'd be trees to climb and the ground to dig in. I could climb the hills, and maybe we could build a boat and sail on the ocean, like the men in some of those pictures you showed us on the Visemo. Could we do all that, Dad?" "Yes," said Mallory, "all that and more." "I could take off all my clothes," exclaimed Mary. "I could wade in the ocean and swim, like we saw people doing in the pictures. I could walk and walk in the grass, and I could watch the stars every night and the birds every day."
Then Helen said, "We could have a house with windows in it, real windows. We saw people looking out of windows in the Visemo, and this glorious fresh air would come right into my house."
"Yes," said Mallory, "but there's something else." He stared at the dark ground. "There are other people back in the city. I could keep on working at the Visemo Center, and I could wire it into another circuit, just as I wired ours. I could show other families what life on the surface is like. Perhaps I could even take another family out on some night like this."
"It's hard to understand you, John," said Helen quietly.
"They are trapped now, victims of their own fear, their own lack of knowledge. But if I could open their eyes and show them what it means to be free under the stars—" They all stared at him, waiting. "We've got a responsibility. The people in the cities are under sentence of death. The Visemo will eventually rob them of the will to live. There will be mass suicides unless I have the courage and strength of purpose to do something about it."
"I don't want to go back,"
said Mary, raising her face again to the sky. Helen turned away from him.
"We hardly know any of the other people in the city. Why should you sacrifice your own happiness to help them?"
"We could have a swell time out here," said Bob. "We don't need anybody else." "There's something I'd like to show you on the Visemo," said Mallory. "You've never seen it, but I think you ought to." His eyes were on the stars.
"But the mayor and the psychologist will be coming soon," said Helen, alarm in her voice. "If they catch us—"
"I think we should risk it. I think we've got to." Helen looked up at the sky again and around at the dark trees gently swaying in the night breeze. Then without a word she took Mary by the hand and moved back toward the lighted opening. 4. Mallory closed the door of the great stone vault and returned through the night to his cupola, which glowed dully in the down-streaming moonlight. He carried a thin circular can under his arm. Crawling through the oval opening, he replaced the removed slab of wall and sealed it into position with a disk of steel that had cut it open. Then he went to the wall at the edge of the now dark Visemo eye. Helen and Mary and Bob sat watching him as he opened a door and stepped behind a screen. After a minute, he came out and sat down beside them. "This is one of the old pictures," he said. "It was taken a long time ago, before the underground cities were built." Reaching out, he turned a knob on the Visemo's tuning dial. As the lights dimmed, brightness flooded the screen and the picture swam into focus. A long needle-nosed torpedo propelled by flame hung tilted upwards against a blue-black sky swimming with white star points. The nose of the torpedo tilted downward, and far below could be seen the lighted skyline of a great city. The lights began slowly to go out in sections until the city was a mountain of darkness. A spurt of flame burst open the piled-up darkness, and white-hot lightning flared. A blinding mountain of fire sprang up and billowed out in a great orange flower that spouted a smoke column 1,000 feet high. Then the orange fire faded, and the column stood like a giant tree, burned black. Now the picture changed on the screen to a rubble-piled city. An ocean of smoke hung above it, fed by 1,000 rising streams of dark vapor. And there were people crawling in the rubble, digging deeply for the injured and dying, and carrying them from the piled ashes and the hills of molten stone and steel, carrying them out onto the scorched earth, and bandaging them and speaking words of comfort to them when comfort was of scant avail. There were cries of agony, and in the foreground a woman was sobbing softly. Long rivers of people, carrying the stricken survivors, were flowing sluggishly toward the horizon. But there were many who would not leave the radiation-saturated rubble of the city for the temporary safety of the horizon, and chose instead to stay with the injured, quieting them with sedatives and tending their wounds. And those who stayed were dying also, with the tragic victims of the disaster, even as they struggled to save them. The picture came into close focus. A man wrapping a bandage suddenly stopped and turned his face to the sky. His hands shook, and then his whole body. He fell backwards and lay still. After a moment, amidst the piled and broken stone, a woman stepped to his side and listened with her ear pressed to his chest for a long moment. Then she turned to another man lying half-bandaged against a shattered stone wall. She finished rewinding the bandage and read a note pinned on a blackened shirt front. With calm purposefulness, she took a hypodermic needle from a bag slung over her shoulder and administered a sedative injection. Nodding reassuringly, she sat close beside the man and talked to him quietly until his rigid face relaxed. Mallory reached toward the tuning dial again, and the picture faded into the Visemo's great staring eye. He did not speak, but sat watching his wife and the two children. Suddenly Mary burst into tears and ran to her mother, sobbing against her neck. With tender solicitude, Helen comforted her. Bob looked at his father and said, "That was awful." Mallory nodded. It was what drove the cities underground. It was the beginning of the kind of life we're living now, and you saw that there were men and women who stayed to help and risked death rather than run away. He pressed his son's hand. Are we going to run away from our city, or are we going to stay and help? There's death here too. The death of minds, the slow destruction of the human heritage of beauty and wisdom and love. Man has created it, just as he created the torpedo that dropped on the city. And there's something we can do about it. Suddenly the spot of light above the door glowed red. They all stared at it, as though it were an accusing eye watching them. Mallory leaned forward. "The mayor and the psychologist are coming down the corridor," he said. "Now listen to me. You've got to do exactly as I say, or we'll never see the sky again." They sat very still. "I'll turn on the Visemo," Mallory said. "Watch it, and let me talk to them. Act as if you're so intent on the Visemo that you can't even turn away for a second. The emotion and thought beams will be turned on too. Let yourself feel them as you've always done. And remember, they've got to go away satisfied that the increased power has made us incapable of rebellion and completely normal from their distorted point of view." Mallory manipulated the tuning dial again, and a picture flashed on the screen of a cake being taken out of an oven by a white-coated, white-capped baker. The voice came, insistent, beguiling. "You'll like this creamy, soft cake. Notice the smooth, white frosting and the mound of tempting whipped cream. Taste the sweetness." Suddenly the door opened silently, and two men stepped across the threshold and stood there, observing Mallory and his family. The Visemo voice flowed on hypnotically. The image of the cake floated across the room, turning slowly. Lights shimmered over its surface, and an hour before, to Helen and the children, it would have been a vision of ecstasy spreading across the tongue and deep into the taste buds. The psychologist stepped forward and looked into the face of each of the seated Visemo viewers. "They don't even follow me with their eyes," he said to the mayor. "They're far too intent on the screen. Absolutely nothing else exists for them at the moment. I think we can be completely sure that their reactions are now normal." "You've no doubt at all?" asked the major. "None whatever. The increase in power has brought them safely back." The mayor stepped to the psychologist's side and peered into the 4 faces. "We still don't know what caused them to depart from the norm in the first place," he said. The psychologist frowned. "Well, no. The human mind is a strange instrument. Sometimes it goes off kilter without apparent reason. If it ever happens again, which I don't think it will, as we're a very well-adjusted society, we've got the remedy. It worked with these people, so we can be quite sure it will work with others. Just turn up the power of the Visemo until the psychological distortion disappears." "It's a great discovery you've made, Doctor," said the mayor. "I'll see that you'll get recognition." "Thank you," said the psychologist. "The satisfaction is reward enough, believe me." Mallory stirred. The mayor looked at him quickly. "Mr. Mallory," he said, "you'll take over the Visemo Centre in the morning as usual." Softly, Mallory said, "Of course, Mr. Mayor, of course." "Everything's all right, Mr. Mallory," said the psychologist reassuringly. "Just go on as you are, and if there's ever any change, let me know. You too, Mrs. Mallory, as you did today. Your complete frankness was very commendable. We've equipped to handle any changes which may occur and remedy them just as we did tonight. You understand that, I'm sure." Mrs. Mallory smiled faintly and nodded. "Just remember," went on the psychologist, "nothing can happen to change you that we can't wipe away as if it had never happened. And so we'll say good night." The door silently opened again, and then closed. Mallory touched the tuning dial. The picture died, and the thought and emotion beams faded, and it was as though a fresh wind had blown through the room. His hand returned to the dial, and Beethoven's Sixth Symphony surged around them. For a long time they listened to the beauty and the power of the music, enraptured by the joyfulness and the deep sorrow of it, and the endless life of it. Mallory opened the wall again and let the moonlight and the freshness into the room. They all went out onto the earth and stood there, feeling the soft ground beneath their feet, smelling the night air, looking up into the sky and all around at the dark, gently swaying trees and bushes and grass that, unknown to man, had silently come back to life through the long years. And as they stood there, the music from the room flowed out and around them, and mingled with the air and the green things in a great resistless surge of deathless beauty. Mallory, deeply aware of all this, was thinking of how he would begin on the morrow to change another circuit to some other family, so that they too might know a new birth of freedom under the stars. The end. To help save more of the forgotten stories of futures past, visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.